Welcome back to A Timey-Wimey Pod, where we watch every episode of Doctor Who from 2005 onwards. My name's Rebecca.
I'm Haley.
And today we are discussing Series 3, Episode 12, The Sound of Drums.
We are here, y'all. We have officially made it to part 2 of the 3-episode-long finale of Series 3.
This is definitely where things, really pick up even more, and where we really get to see John Sim as the Master for the first time. And oh dear.
There is so much to discuss, and I cannot wait to talk about it all with you, but I know that first we have the fantastic facts.
Yes, we do. So this episode aired June 23rd, 2007. It was written by Russell T. Davies and directed by Colin Tegu, who also does next week's episode and then later does The Fires of Pompeii.
Ooh.
I know. But then nothing else after that.
Interesting.
I know. William Hughes, who plays the young master in this episode, previously played a young Casanova in Casanova, which was written by Russell T. Davies and starred David Tennant. So he played a young David Tennant in Casanova and then played a young John Sim master here.
You know, everything is connected.
Something we need to talk about way back in season 1 of this podcast, in our Dalek episode, we talked about how originally they didn't know if they were going to get the rights to the Daleks back when they restarted the show. And so there's a version of Dalek that is with the Toclophane instead of the Daleks. And we talked about that all the way back in Dalek. And they were also, I think we talked about it, gonna maybe use them in the Satan pit before, because remember they didn't know if they were gonna have the money for the beast, so they were almost there too, but they finally make their appearance here in The Sound of Drums.
It's actually insane just how long the idea of the Toclophane had been in RTD's mind to have on the show.
I wonder if there's anything else like that in the show where someone had the idea for something for a really long time, but then it didn't happen for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd be so curious. Maybe we'll find out more of related things as we continue on with our podcast.
So the scene where Martha jokes that she thought the doctor was going to say that the master is his brother was a nod to an old rumor and theory during Classic Who that Roger Delgado's master would have been revealed as the doctor's long lost brother in season 10 if it weren't for Delgado passing away. And this was Russell's way of kind of poking fun at that theory, because I guess he never liked it, which, yeah, is valid.
Honestly, for the longest time, I always just assumed they were long lost brothers or cousins, but now paying more attention to what is said in this episode and just what I know now as a fan, I know they're not long lost brothers, but it is an interesting theory for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely see that maybe that would have happened, but I don't know if we know for sure. The scene in which the Doctor and the Master are on the phone, they filmed that with Tennant and Sim actually on the phone together. And if you know anything about TV production, whenever a character's on the phone with someone, they're not actually talking to anyone. But for this scene, they had them actually talk to each other to make it more real, which I think was a great idea because I love that scene.
Such a great choice that they made in filming that, because it just made it so much more authentic. I'm glad they did that.
Okay, so I couldn't really put my thoughts into words last week when we were talking about how people don't like the cliffhanger because it's resolved so quickly here. But I was able to find the words this time. Yes, the cliffhanger is them getting stuck and the future kind, about to get to them. But that's not the thing that matters in that cliffhanger. The thing that matters is that the Master's back. He has a TARDIS. He's gone somewhere. So them getting back to Earth easily really doesn't bother me, because I'm not thinking at the end of Utopia, oh no, Jack and the Doctor and Martha are, stranded at the end of the universe and the future kind's about to get to them. What's going to happen? I'm thinking, what's going to happen with the master and all that. So that's what I was trying to say last week, but I couldn't find the
Mm.
words until now.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with you. I think there's a difference between this specific cliffhanger in Utopia and previous or future cliffhangers that RTD has done that are
Yes.
criticized, because those I think have a lot of more merit to be criticized. But this episode, I agree. Like, I wasn't really worried about the future kinds. They were kind of just there and not really the most important part of the plot.
Mm-hmm. So Jack says that his vortex manipulator hasn't worked in years, but he still wears it all the time. I don't know. Not worth getting into, but I just kind of thought it was funny.
No, it is funny. Interesting for sure. One of the lines he says, though, which I absolutely love, is he tells Martha, moral of the story, get stuck at the end of the universe with an X time agent with a vortex manipulator. And I don't know. Something about that is just so classic Jack.
It's so classic Jack. Something that is very classic Doctor that happens is he tells Martha and Jack, "Oh, I'll know the master when I see him." Time Lords always do, except for all the times that they don't, and all the times going forward in the show when the Doctor doesn't recognize the master for quite a bit of time.
Yeah, the Doctor doesn't really have a great track record of sensing other Time Lords or sensing the Master in
Mm-hmm.
general, whether the Master is chameleon arced or not. Like, it really doesn't matter. Like, the Doctor just can't sense it. I think the Doctor wants to say that they do, but
Half the time when the Doctor meets himself, he doesn't know it's himself.
so true. Actually, I didn't think about that, but you're right. Like, he doesn't even recognize himself. So how is he supposed to recognize the Master or anything? Oh my gosh, yeah, we can be going for a
it's
long time about
it's
this.
just it's just my favorite bit because he says it all the time, like Time Lords would recognize each other anywhere, like I would know him the second I saw him, and it's like, okay, but you never do. Like all the times in the future, it's my favorite bit. I think it's hilarious.
Oh, it's completely hilarious. I love it so much. And later on in this episode, when talking about the Archangel Network, he's like, "Oh, basically, the Master like, canceled himself out. That's how I couldn't detect him." And I'm like, that really doesn't explain it,
No.
Doctor. It really doesn't. You think
No.
it's saying something, but your Time Lord sensing abilities are just not really existent.
Okay, moving on. I love how shocked the Doctor is that the Master is Prime Minister, but that he's even more shocked that the Master has a wife.
I find that honestly really funny.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'm so curious, like, why was he so offended at that part?
he was shocked. He couldn't believe it. Okay, we need to talk about Lucy because I want to know everything about her.
Okay, I was literally going to ask you, like, your thoughts on Lucy, because we don't get a ton about her in this episode, and I think we get a bit more insight of her as a character in the next episode, but it's still not a lot. Like, we get the bare bones. The reporter in this episode talks about how she basically had, like, a very nice upbringing, but she's not especially bright, which why would you
I
tell
know.
someone that to their face?
Imagine someone saying that to you, like, "Oh, shots fired!" Like, damn.
No, I know. But yeah, I want to know everything about her too. Like, I really want to know the psychology. Why did she willingly, well, actually, I don't know if it was willingly, become
You
his wife?
we find out things much later on that basically insinuate that she was being controlled, manipulated, whatever, which I
Hmm.
do believe, but I also think like even just watching the two of them in this episode, I think there is a little bit of a willingness there. And so
Yeah.
I want to know everything about her, how they met, why the master chose her. I need to know everything. And we really don't get that much, unfortunately.
No. And like, are they like, yeah, they say they're married, but were they truly married? Did they have a wedding? Or was it very much like fake marriage certificate? Like, I know that it's like
Ooh.
semantics, but like, I'm just so curious, like, what part of that relationship was real and what part of that relationship was created, just like the rest of Saxon's backstory?
And he says that he was so good to her father. And I just
Yeah.
want to know, I just want to know more. How do they, like, why her? How did they meet? Like, how much was her kind of willingly working with him, working for him, and how much of it was kind of like hypnotism, mind control, whatever you want to call it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be really interested to like learn like the truth, because I do agree
Mm-hmm.
with you. Like, I really do think there was willingness there. You know, like there's people
Yeah.
in this like three-parter that, yes, they were hypnotized by the master, but they also didn't cheer on the Toclafane invading
Mm-hmm.
the world like Lucy did, you know?
Yeah. No, there's definitely there's something there. I just have a lot of questions that will never be answered.
A line I absolutely love in this episode is when Saxon is on TV and he says, "What this country needs right now is a doctor." Something about the way he says it, just like how insane he is in saying it.
Mhm.
I love it. I love that scene. And the master is really evil and awful. There's no way in getting around that. And I am not defending the master when I'm saying this, but I love watching the master. There's just something about the chaos the master
Oh,
brings to the table.
yeah. It's like any episode that honestly any incarnation of the master is in is going to be a good
Mm-hmm.
episode, and it's going to
Yeah.
be insane and chaotic and fun. And it makes sense why they keep bringing them back because we eat it up every time. So Tish, last time we saw her, she was working for a creepy man known as Lazarus, and now she's working for another terrible man. This time, Harold Saxon, the prime minister. And I think it's so funny that she goes up to him and is like, "So, what am I supposed to be doing?" Like, there's no one else she could have asked.
That is funny now that you mention it.
Like, Tish, how do you keep finding yourself in these situations? And I know it's because of the master that she got the Lazarus experiment job and
Mm-hmm.
that she got this job, but girl, how do you keep finding yourself here?
No, I know. I was about to mention that because after her whole horror of an experience with Richard Lazarus, I mean, girl had to escape from him. He was absolutely insane. She just gets this random call up like she did for Lazarus and is like, "Hey, work for Harold Saxon." And she's like, "Okay." Like, why was she so open to doing that after Lazarus? Like, I would have been burned. I
Yeah.
would have moved out of the country. I would be like, "No, we're done here."
Yeah. It is kind of crazy. And like I wonder what happened when she told her parents that, "Oh, good news. I got a job working for Harold Saxon."
Well, we all know Francine loved,
Oh,
probably
she
loved
loves
that.
she loves Saxon. I have a lot of rants about Francine, but I'll save it for a little bit.
Me too. Something I find really interesting that's mentioned, and it's really easy to miss this line if you're not paying attention, but something that is mentioned by the doctor and kind of like amongst him and Martha is that since Smith and Jones, in Martha's OG world, it has only been 4 days between Smith and
Mhm.
Jones and Harold Saxon becoming prime minister, which is insane and means it's been 4 days of that, including the Lazarus thing.
I know. I know. Yeah, isn't that crazy? And the time in 42 where Martha called her mom all those times.
Yes, you're right.
It makes sense though because I think the Lazarus experiment takes place the day after Smith and Jones.
Oh, yeah, it does. It does. Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But dang, a lot can happen in 4 days.
A lot can happen. Oh, dang. A lot can really happen in 4 days. The poor Jones family, they go through a lot.
Since we're talking about them, I say we open the can of worms and we discuss discuss our thoughts on Francine because this woman has made me so irrationally upset and angry this season. Honestly, every time I watch this season.
But you know who actually tries to come through in this episode? Tries to be useful and helpful and not ruin everything? Mr. Jones, Martha's father, who warns her about Harold Saxon and his people and everything that's been going on and tells her to run. And you know what Francine is doing while he's talking to Martha on the phone? She's yelling at him and she's like, no, we have to get her away from him. You don't understand. And she's still like going on. She's all Team Saxon.
And just why is she still maintaining that when Mr. Jones is literally being pushed against the wall for telling Martha this? Like, I know there was so much beef between Francine and Martha's dad. It's the reason they're divorced. Like, you can tell there's a lot of beef there.
Yeah.
But just on a human level, you're just standing there yelling at your ex-husband while he's being pushed against the wall and thrown in the back of a van.
And they're literally being like held captive by these like random Saxon people. I don't know what else to call them.
And then it literally takes until Francine herself is forced into the van for her to be like, oh, these people can't be trusted.
All because she listened to one singular man tell her that she shouldn't trust the doctor and that her daughter shouldn't be around the doctor.
Again, Francine, we talked about this in the Lazarus experiment. Francine, why are you trusting a random man who you have never met before over your daughter who is literally about to become like a medical doctor? Like,
over
absolutely
your
no
smart,
words.
sensible, living on her own, putting herself through medical school daughter. Okay, let's go back a little bit before we get into everything else surrounding that scene. What do you think about Vivian Rook and that whole scene of her, quote unquote, interviewing Lucy?
I love that scene so much, actually. I really like that she truly is coming to Lucy trying to help her out initially. I mean, later in this episode, we find out that she sent like all of her files to Torchwood. So Vivian really knew like a lot of things were very, very wrong. But I do find it admirable that she would go to Lucy first and to make sure, like, to let her know and be like, hey, like, let's get you out of this.
Yeah.
Which makes it even sadder when Lucy narcs her out to Saxon and causes her to be murdered by the Toclafane. That's just so sad to me. What are your thoughts?
Death.
Yeah, rough death for sure. What are your thoughts on Vivian?
I agree with what you said, except if it was me personally, I would have gone in, kind of more assuming Lucy may not be so innocent and naive to what is going on. And I would try to kind of work from there instead of showing her all my cards, if you know what I mean.
That is a very smart approach, and I wonder how things would have gone. Honestly, actually, she probably would have been murdered.
Oh, yeah.
Either way.
I do love the twist where it kind of looks like for a second Lucy's like, well, things are weird. And then she's like, well, I made my choice. Isn't that right, Harry? And then the master's right there. Like, that is such a great moment. And you instantly feel for Vivian and you feel how like, oh, shoot, just that fear when someone overhears you talking about something that you really don't want them to overhear. That's great.
It is. And one of the things that Vivian mentions to Lucy is that Harold Saxon rose to prominence after
the downfall of Harriet Jones. This is why I get upset about Ten's actions in the Christmas invasion, because it all leads to this. If he didn't do what he did to Harriet Jones, who maybe she deserved it, maybe she was just doing her job, I don't know, Saxon never would have rose to power like this.
Pisses me off to this very day. The doctor could have avoided literally all of this. Absolutely wild. Harriet Jones, queen, you are remembered. You may not have made a great choice. That does not mean you deserved what happened to you.
It is crazy that he was basically able to do all of this in 18 months.
Actually, diabolical. Like,
Yeah.
insane. Like, what are the odds the master comes with just enough time politically to run for office?
Yeah, and they even mentioned later on how he helped design the Valiant. And so they
Mm-hmm.
designed that, built it, and got it up and running all within 18 months.
Yeah, that is so crazy. And side note, the Valiant as like a just like a concept is so crazy. Like it's this whole like landing strip in the sky for planes and like this build like it's crazy.
Oh, the Avengers 2012 literally stole this concept
Did
straight
they?
from this episode. Yes, they did. They literally have their like own Valiant that's also like a flying ship that planes can land on and like take off on. And a later Avengers movie also steals the idea that 10% of the population gets instantly killed. So I just think that's funny.
No, that is funny. Dang.
And then it's reversed and all the people come back.
Almost like the year that never happened.
Yeah. Except for them it was like 5 years, which was kind of crazy.
Oh.
Yeah. All the former Marvel kids listening know what I'm talking about.
Another awful moment in this episode that's also kind of not iconic in a good way. I don't know. It's just a very memorable scene for me. It's when the trio, Martha, Jack, and Ten, are in Martha's flat and they discover there's a
Yes.
bomb attached to her TV.
He is out to get her. No one ever
He
talks about
really
how
is.
Martha loses her entire apartment.
No, it is never brought up ever after this episode, which is so interesting. Like, she lost her entire apartment and then her whole family, except for Leo, got like imprisoned.
Yeah.
And like,
No.
we've talked about how in literally every episode of this season, she's been going through it. But I think, her in this episode, it tops the cake. It's, in my opinion, there's another moment which definitely tops the cake, but this one is up there.
Yeah. It's this and then everything that she has to do after this episode. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like you didn't think things could get worse for her because we saw every episode things getting worse and worse and worse. And then it was all leading up to this, loses her apartment, family taken into prison and held captive for a year, and then she has to go walk the whole earth for an entire year by herself.
RTD really just put her through it.
He really did. And we need to talk about Martha's suffering more because it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite Martha moments is when she's calling her family after her apartment is blown up and the doctor's like, "Don't call them." And she's like, "I'll do what I like." Yes. It's so good. So good. I love how angry she gets at him in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And even when they're driving and she's like, "This is all your fault." And people will be like, "That's not fair, blah blah blah." And like, yeah, technically it's not fair because like how could the doctor have known any of this was happening slash going to happen? But I just love that Martha kind of gets her moment of releasing all that anger and frustration on the doctor because I think he does deserve that. He does sometimes need someone to be like, "This is your fault." Like, what? And someone to just yell at him.
It kind of is his fault that Saxon
Hmm.
got to when he did. At the very least, it is Ten's fault that that Saxon got to the time he did because Ten put basically a lock to where Saxon could only be at the end of the universe or be the last place the TARDIS was.
Hmm. Yeah, she even says at some point, like, "Oh, you just had to send him back to Earth."
Mm-hmm. So even though he obviously couldn't control this, he couldn't foresee this, even though he's claimed otherwise that he could, sense another Time Lord, that's neither here nor there. Like,
Hmm.
it's not all his fault, but he does
No.
have a tiny bit. And I can't blame Martha because I don't know what I would how I would be in her shoes. So she was so real for that and
So
yelling at
real.
him. This episode, honestly, these 3 episodes, Utopia, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords, they have a lot of really great lines. And one of the absolute psychotic lines is between the master and the doctor when they're talking to each other over the phone. And the doctor just says, "Master," and Saxon goes, "I like it when you use my name." And he says it he's so insane when he says this.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tin goes on to say, "You chose it, psychiatrist field day." And then the master replies, "As you chose yours, the man who makes people better. How sanctimonious is that?" And, that whole exchange really explains their dynamic so well.
Yeah.
And you instantly see the differences between the two of them, how insane the master is. Like, this whole exchange is so great.
Oh, this whole conversation is so good. And I love when he takes the phone from Martha and says, "I'm here." And then the master's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh my gosh." And like, what I think he takes it off speaker or does something, I
Yeah,
forget, but his reaction is so, so good.
so good. And then they have a little debrief session.
A little
10
girly
tells
chat, if you will.
Yes. 10 tells the master all about Gallifrey and how it burned, and the Time Lords are gone, and 10 survived, and he basically ended it all. And the master was like, "Yeah, the Time Lords resurrected me because they were like, you will be the perfect warrior for the Time War." And then he goes on to say, "But actually, 10, I ran away because I was so scared and became a human so they can never find me." And I just find that so funny, actually, because he's like, "I'm the best warrior. They all thought it, but I actually ran away."
But I ran away. I got scared. I got a little too scared. Oh, in this scene, the doctor says that, they can just go off fighting across the universe. They don't have to stay on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like, for once, for that to happen because whenever we see the
Yes.
master, it's always on Earth. But let's get them anywhere else in the universe.
That would be so interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like them chasing each other among the stars. Oh my gosh, it would be so good. Fighting in the TARDIS on another level.
Mm-hmm. This is also when he says that he sent Jack's Torchwood team off to the Himalayas, and then the Doctor, Jack, and Martha have to go on the run, which I think is like my favorite part of this episode. Is just the three of them
Mm-hmm.
on the run, hiding out, outlaws. Like that's fun.
It is so fun to watch. They're wanted. Their faces are plastered all over the TV. It is so good. And I love how, like, the trio are all sitting together and they're eating chips,
Mm-hmm.
And Martha just nods to Jack to ask the doctor about the master, which is just, I don't know, the way she nods towards Jack, like, "I don't want to ask, you ask," is just funny.
Yeah, this is another one of my absolute favorite scenes is when they're just sitting around eating the chips. Also, this show loves chips. People are constantly eating chips in this show. And we get a little story time about who the master is and his connection to the doctor.
Yeah, 10 shares that the master saw eternity through the untempered schism. And then he goes on to say, some would be inspired, some would run away, and some would go mad. And speaking of the ones who ran away, the doctor is one of them.
Of course.
And of course, the master is the one who went mad. And I just find that really interesting. But at the same time, like, I get it. Like, I understand why that made him go mad, but also I don't.
Yeah, I guess I've never really like thought about it, but I guess if you're just staring into that, it would be a little crazy.
Yeah, I could see that. Do you know what we need to discuss?
What?
Ten's reaction when he finds out Jack works for Torchwood.
Yes. Yes, we do. I love his reaction and how upset he gets. And he's like, after everything they've done, you're working for them. And Jack, like, how he talks about like how he took it over and he made it new to honor the doctor, which is like a crazy thing to say.
Absolutely insane. And like the doctor gets more okay with it, but you just know he will never fully ever be okay with Torchwood existing.
Mm-hmm. And this and spoilers, Journey's End are the most that the doctor ever interacts with Torchwood because he never goes on to Torchwood. And I just think that that says a lot, you know?
It says so much.
Mm-hmm.
We also find out the tea about the Archangel Network and how basically, because it's in like everyone's phones and devices, everyone's basically being hypnotized that the Master is great and to vote for Harold Saxon. What are your thoughts on that? Would you be hypnotized by the Master?
Would I be hypnotized? Personally, if I was being hypnotized, I just wouldn't be hypnotized. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I've never really thought about that. But
Yeah, I don't know
I
why I
guess
asked the question.
but as far as like the plot device of like the Archangel Network, it makes, I don't want to say it makes sense, but like it's not something that bothers me or takes me out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, sure. Cell
Yeah.
phones.
Again, though, Ten goes on to say that this Archangel Network canceled the Master out, and that's how he didn't detect him. And how?
Yeah, that line doesn't make sense. I'm like, okay,
Mm-mm.
but you don't have a phone, so what's your excuse?
And
And then
then,
he says, it's like when you fancy someone and they don't know you exist. And I think that's
yes.
the funniest line of this entire season. And I just love when Martha looks at Jack and then he's like, you too, huh? And that's all that needs saying because it's so good.
So good. Oh my gosh. Dang, Martha. Like, that would hurt so bad being told that. Like, when you're trying
Yeah.
to figure out, like, this TARDIS key perception filter necklace thing, and that's what the doctor tells you.
Yeah. She's like, oh, yeah, I know what that's like.
There's really some zings in this episode.
Mm-hmm. So, someone we meet in this episode is fictional US President Arthur Winters, and I need your thoughts on our
Okay,
fictional president.
I am so glad you asked me that because I have so many thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
First, Arthur Winters is a very British name to me. So for it to
You're
be the
so
name
right.
of a fictional American president is actually so funny. I really like him. You know what? I can't deny it. I like him.
Yeah.
Very presidential, very like I'm trying to figure out who I'm thinking of.
I don't know. He doesn't necessarily remind me of anyone in real life, but I just love how he is like immediately done with Harold Saxon's nonsense. And he's
Mhm.
like, we're taking control because Britain elected a moron. And I just think it's so funny. Also, I feel like we need to talk about the choice to use a fictional president here, but then in End of Time, to have real life president Barack Obama turn into John Sim. That was a choice that they made.
It was a very, very big choice that they made, and I will save my thoughts for that if I can even compose them for the end of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Great point. I agree. Don't know why they made that decision, but like you, I also love that the president in this episode is just immediately pissed. Like he's like, "This is over. You're done." The whole exchange at the airport after Air Force One landed,
So good.
so good. And he is talking to Harold Saxon, and Harold Saxon is just like mumbling and then pretends to unzip his mouth. So good.
So good. So good.
They really nailed writing a fictional president. I feel
Yeah.
like not all shows do it really good, especially if they're not like an American based show, but RTD, he did very well.
I love a fictional president. I eat it up
Mm-hmm.
every time. He full on gets assassinated in this episode and stays assassinated, which just means like the entire world watched the president get assassinated by the prime minister, and then they just all moved on and we never heard about it ever again. And that's kind of crazy.
It's honestly diabolical because the way he was murdered by the prime minister was through the toclophane,
Hmm.
which is just crazy. Like the president was like over everything, but he was like, "Sure, I'll introduce the toclophane or toclophane cousins or whatever to the world," and then he just gets murdered by them. And like you said, no one brings it up ever again after this.
I do love that line at the airport where the master whispers to Lucy and he says, "The last president of the United States." Like that line, that was crazy.
So crazy. And something that's also kind of crazy is the trio is there at the airport with their perception filter necklaces on,
Hmm.
and Martha's family is unloaded, and the master, full total maniac in how he's acting with them.
Yeah, and this is where Martha says that she wants to kill him, and then Jack says that he wants to go up and break his neck. But the doctor says, "No, he's a Time Lord. He's my problem. I gotta take care of it." What do you think about that?
It's honestly really annoying because he doesn't just say that. He's like, I've got to save him. Doctor, you've literally faced the master before. You've never been able to save the master. And I get it. I do get it because Ten and the Master are like the last known Time Lords. Like their whole planet is gone, all the Time Lords are gone, everything was lost in the Time War. But at the same time, the Doctor needs to face a little bit of reality and realize he's not going to be able to save the Master, at least here, you know? And I find it interesting that in response to Jack saying he wants to kill Harold Saxon, Ten just says, that sounds like Torchwood.
Yeah, got him with that one.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's so great and interesting about the dynamic between these characters is the doctor is always going to try to help the master, always going to hope that the
Mm,
master changes and becomes a better person,
true.
and the master never will, except for maybe almost once later, but we'll get to it.
No, that is true. And I mean, it is admirable that the doctor does that and doesn't just like try to like match the master with trying to figure out how to kill him, you know? It's just
It's what
more,
makes their relationship so interesting and compelling is the frenemies dynamic that they have.
you know what? You're right. You're right. And like, even though I have my frustration, like, I get it at the
Hmm.
same time.
Oh yeah, I definitely have frustrations with it at times, especially in like later episodes, but we'll get
Hmm.
to it.
But then they all smuggle their way onto the Valiant. Well, actually, they teleport their way. They're not smuggled. I don't know why I said smuggled.
Yes, they teleport, but then like accidentally time travel at the same time because by the time they get there, it's dawn. But okay.
Yeah, very interesting. But they discover the TARDIS is cannibalized and is a paradox machine.
This made me think about for the first time how the TARDIS was away from the Doctor for 18 months, and I just never really thought about it until now.
Wait.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. That makes
I
me so sad,
know.
actually.
Yeah.
Do we think she was upset? I feel like she would have to be.
She was upset. Ugh, and like I remember the first time watching this episode and seeing that scene and just like the shock, the horror, the like, "Oh my gosh." It always hits because you're like, what is going on with the TARDIS? Why is it like this?
The moment that everything kind of gets a little bit crazy after the president is assassinated And when the master is like, actually, I can see you all. Their perception filter did not work with me.
Yeah.
The master goes on to also say to the doctor that why would you use the sonic screwdriver if you have a laser screwdriver? And I don't know. That's always so funny to me.
Yeah, and I love, well, I don't love, but it's always funny when he kills Jack and then he's like, and then I can kill him again.
It's so bad, but it's so funny at the same time. And
Hmm.
I think, honestly, side note, like, all of these, like, conflicting feelings about the master really, a lot of it is credited to John Sims and his portrayal. Like, he nailed the part of playing such an insane character that you feel
Hmm.
for, that you hate, that you laugh at, but that you also like don't want to win, but you want him to win at the same time. Like he just does it so well.
Absolutely. Like, they, the dynamic between the two of them, John Sims' performance, it's perfect. And I've seen some criticisms over the years of John Sims' Master, but they'll never make me hate it because
Mm-mm.
I just love it.
So good. And something we did not talk about at all, but it's towards the beginning of this episode when he just ups and murders the entire cabinet
Oh,
with gas.
that's a great scene.
And that scene is where we get the classic meme of his sad face.
Oh, yes. And then the classic meme of his like gas mask and the thumbs up. That's great.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Hmm.
Did you notice on the Valiant that before everything kicks off, he asks Lucy if she wants a jelly baby?
Oh, of course. Classic. So, for the listeners, I'm looking at my notes and I just have one note that says, yeah, you should be sorry. And I'm like, who am I referring to? You know who I'm referring to? Any guesses?
Not a clue, actually.
Francine, when she comes in and sees Martha and says sorry. Yeah, you should be sorry.
I bet you are, Francine.
Hmm. So the doctor gets old aged, which let's just save discussion for next week. We can't get
Okay.
into it here. But Jack tells Martha that she needs to leave, like to get out. And I just wonder why they both don't leave. Why they don't leave together.
Such a really great question. I've always wondered that myself too, and I really don't know. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there's really no reason. Like, honestly, it would have been great for Martha to have him come. Like, he, I don't know, could have shielded her from getting shot at or anything. You know, she could have had
Yeah.
some help out there, but she just had to go do it herself. And can't blame her for that.
No, but would have been very helpful to have Jack by her.
Yeah, he should have gone with her.
The ending of this episode always kind of takes me out because
Hmm.
Voodoo Child is playing. That's the song, right? Voodoo Child.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just, a classic insane villain song in Doctor Who, which I love. We had it with the Toy Maker, and we have, a scene in next week. And I love these villain music moments. It's always so great. But the reason why it always takes me out is the last shot where it's just the old David Tennant and Lucy on one side and Harold Saxon on the other, just
No,
staring out the
it's
window.
so good. And before that happens, one of my favorite shots is Lucy like kind of dancing in place.
Yes.
It's so funny. I don't even know how to explain it or describe it, but it's hilarious.
So good. Okay, but the shot of the Toclapane invading the world,
Hmm.
terrifying. Did they come out of the rift or what?
Yeah, I don't know what that was. I guess it's because, they're coming from way into the future, that time and the universe just kind of cracked open, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's so freaky. And just like the shot of Martha
Hmm.
teleporting to the ground and just her looking up at the chocolate fane shooting all of these innocent people because the master is like, get rid of like 10% of the world.
Yeah. And when she says, I'm coming back, such a good, iconic line. And to that, I say, do it again. Come back again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who is the star of the show?
Ooh. I actually don't know.
I'm going to give it to my girl Vivian because she's the only one that caught on to what was happening, what was really going on, the truth. And she was smart enough to send all her notes to Torchwood. So she's a certified baddie. And for that, I have to give her my respect.
So true. Such a great choice. Me, myself, I gotta give a shout out to Martha Jones's dad, Mr. Jones.
Yep.
He was a real one. He told Martha to run, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that someone in her family didn't have it out against her.
I agree. What is the heart of this episode?
Don't trust random men who come up to you speaking about your daughter and who she's traveling with.
And her new friend, who seems, at the time, perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree with that. I would also say, be careful who you vote for. Do we have any reviews from the past?
They are all from IMDb, and this first one is by the user Philip-Prize-1 and was written on July 17th, 2007. And he said, "So this is it, the greatest episode of Doctor Who I have ever seen. It's the sheer scale of the story that's just incredible. Never has the Doctor been so vulnerable, and never has it ever been quite so dark, and the situation seems so helpless in an episode. John Sims completely steals the entire series as the Master. He is every bit the mirror of David Tennant's Doctor, as the Master should be, complete with human companion Lucy. Only he married his companion. Poor Rose and poor Martha."
Oh my gosh. They had to get us with that one.
No, I know. And they go on to say that, in short, never has Doctor Who been so tense and so dramatic, so funny and so action-packed as this. I had the same feeling watching this as I did watching the first part of Star Trek's Best of Both Worlds. The realization that my favorite series had just produced its best hour of television yet. If I could rate it 20 out of 10, I would, but I can't, so it's a big fat 10 from me, referring to the rating.
Nice.
This next review is by the user Dr_Foreman, and it was written on June 24th, 2007. And they went on to say that the sound of drums is not entirely without merit, but it's pretty close. They say that this is a highly repetitive and derivative episode. We already had a politics-oriented story in the first season, so the goofy Downing Street material here is much the same as what we already saw in World War III. Also, this is the third consecutive season finale to involve flying robots attacking Earth, not to mention the 8th or 9th or perhaps 30th story to prominently feature cellular phones as part of the plot. Oh, and the rubbish sphere aliens look exactly like the interrogation robot from Star Wars. So this Dross is original in what respect exactly? I feel like I've seen it all before. Done better."
Okay. The first part I disagree with because I think everything that happens in Aliens of London, World War III, it's so different to what's happening here that I'm not like, oh, another political episode, another 10 Downing Street episode. They're so different, different characters, different things are happening, different doctor. Like, him being the prime minister in 10 Downing Street is really not the focus. There's other things going on. We are moving around a lot in this episode, while in those we were at 10 Downing Street for most of the time. So the similarities don't bother me at all because there's really not, like, okay, there's stuff with the prime minister and 10 Downing Street, but that's kind of where it ends.
Yeah, I agree. All right. This last review I have is from the user DVD_connoisseur, and they wrote on June 23rd, 2007, that John Sims steals the show as a psychopathic master. He has all the best lines and eats the part up like the world's most scrumptious meal. Sim is the very picture of a maniacal genius, and it's hard to imagine anybody delivering a better performance in this role. His scenes with the cabinet and the president of the USA will be difficult to forget. They also continue to say that the Jones family are proving more entertaining and likable than the Tylers.
Hello? Excuse? Don't you dare disrespect Jackie Tyler like that.
Exactly. And what about Francine do you like?
Yeah. What about Tish do you like? Who's just like constantly being given all these weird jobs and takes them.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I don't not like Tish, but she's also not my favorite.
Yeah. No, I'm not trying to hate on Tish. I don't think they're really fleshed out or given as much to do as Pete and Jackie Tyler.
No, they're definitely not.
The disrespect. Do we have any final observations before we go?
No, but I am looking forward to discussing Martha next episode and the year that never was.
I have so much to say about next week's episode. I can't wait.
So as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at timeywimePod.
And email us anything and everything to timeywimePod@gmail.com.
And we will all talk to you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Ta-ra.